Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of the Empower Performance Podcast. Today, I have a special guest, Philip Ha. He's a Taekwondo black belt. He's getting his degree in clinical mental health counseling, and he also is a strength coach. So he has a very wide base when it comes to health, performance, the mental, emotional side. Phil, would you mind telling us your athletic background and then how you got into coaching?
Yeah, so I've never really participated in competitive sports entirely. But I have like throughout the years, I played a wide variety of sports. I was very fortunate back then during my school years where I got to, play things like, kickball and then baseball, football, flag football, basketball. Basketball was probably my main sport actually
Mhm.
at the time, even though I didn't make the high school team. My short stature of 5'5" only got me so far, but played a little bit of volleyball. So any sports that you could think of, I probably touched it at least twice or a few times. So had that general base. It wasn't until college that I really tried to be more competitive. And that's where when I actually started Taekwondo in
Mhm.
college. So I didn't start Taekwondo when I was younger, even though I had little introductions to it when I was younger in Korean school, actually. But it wasn't until college where I was like really trying to do my best. That was when I really started competing at the collegiate level. That there's something called ECTC, or the Eastern Collegiate Taekwondo Conference, and that's where I got my like big intro to competing and whatnot as far as an athlete perspective goes. And then how I got into strength coaching, my original major was in exercise science. So I wanted to become a physical therapist. But then over the time, my grades were just not cutting it for that grad school requirement, unfortunately. So I had my doubts, and then I switched over to an IT degree to graduate. But throughout that time, for 10 years, I've kind of just been self-studying a lot with around, especially mobility and flexibility. That was the biggest thing that I struggled with when first starting out Taekwondo, because I was very inflexible when I was a lot younger. And, that kind of just bled into my college years, of course. I always wanted the splits, and Taekwondo was very high kicking, a
Mhm.
lot of flexibility in the hips and hamstrings and whatnot. So that was kind of my introduction into, I guess, the strength coaching world and learning more about mobility and flexibility coaching. And then that also led me to a guy named Ben Patrick, knees over toes guy, who I went through his coaching curriculum with the whole like knee concept. For me, I view their coaching as like more similar to rehab. So
Mhm.
I wouldn't like, even though they are, quote unquote strength coaching program, I would say it kind of falls more towards the rehab side, even
Mhm.
though that's not proper. It's like there's a good fine line and distinction we have to make as far as liabilities and scope of work goes. But then after that, I got introduced to even the deeper worlds of strength and conditioning, and
Mhm.
like learning about, guys like, not only Charles Poliquin, but Louis Simmons, and
Mhm.
understanding now is like, I've got the conjugate method a bug. So like really learning the West Side barbell and everything now and getting used to that. But that's kind of like a TLDR as much as I could as far as my background, and then going into that, athlete or competitive and like athletic background world.
So I want to speak to real quick. You're talking about mobility and strength. People should look at your profile because you can essentially do the splits. You're very flexible. But then I also think you posted the other day that you're doing the chest press machine with like 3 plates on either side. And then I think saw you posted you deadlifting 5 plates. So you're certainly very strong as well. I think that a lot of people think strength and conditioning, and then I always say that conditioning is kind of forgotten. Typically, strength is the primary focus. People don't focus on mobility so much. Don't focus on power or speed very much, and then conditioning is often forgotten. And I think to be a well-rounded athlete, you need to focus on all those buckets, especially for competitive sport. In a combat sport, for example, it'd be terrible to be exhausted. I think that's like one of the worst places to get exhausted is in combat sport when somebody can strike you or submit you or pin you and you're in a very uncomfortable position and you don't have many options. But then also, mobility, like you said, for high kicks is incredibly important. It would feel terrible to have physical limitations that you just can't reach somebody from a certain distance or at a certain height. So when I think of training, I don't think the way that most people look at it. If you look at like the general population that goes to like a Gold's Gym, for example, they just want to be big and they just want to be strong. I think part of that is ego driven, where it's like they just want to be bigger than the next guy, stronger than the next guy, so they can feel good about themselves. But I think training for performance is an important thing too. It is cool to be huge. It is cool to be super jacked. It is cool to be stronger than your buddies and all that stuff. But to not get winded going up the stairs, or to be able to touch your toes, or to not be in pain, or to be able to sprint, with your kids or something like that and not pull a hamstring. So I do think it's important to train all those physical qualities. Along those lines, I was going to ask, what would you say are the major demands for Taekwondo performance, especially in the competitive realm?
Major demands. It's hard to say like major demands from the lens. So I would probably rephrase that question
Mhm.
of what are the things that are really missing
Okay.
from in the taekwondo world in particular. That is the which actually it kind of falls in the whole like what other sports athletes
Mhm.
are falling trapped to, which is the early sports specialization. As we now know, or parents are still not recognizing as much, but like again, it's all these travel sports teams and all these coaches, they're pushing for early specialization when reality is that these kids, they're not even forming an athletic base. Like
Mhm.
I really, even though I started taekwondo a lot later, I do credit the fact that like I'm able to perform a lot better than I probably would have because of my wealth of experience in doing different activities, like
Mhm.
again, like even dodgeball, baseball, like all those little things, like having that wide base of athleticism is so important. But then you look at some of these kids and like they try to like throw a football, or well, obviously throwing a football is pretty tough still, but like you have them, try other sports. They're so uncoordinated, but then
Mhm.
they like go into fighting and they're like all of a sudden like a genius. But some of the things that often we see in the taekwondo world is a lot of injuries. A
Mhm.
lot of kids like pushing through injuries also, and pushing through pain, and they're always a lot of the kids always come to me and they're like so for me they'll call me Instructor Phil. It's like, Instructor Phil, like my hips are feeling achy, like my knees are like really like hurting every time I even like throw a kick. And I'm just like, but you're only 10 years old. You're 10 years old, 11 years old, and you shouldn't be experiencing all these
Mhm.
things. And it just goes to show that, a lot of them, a lot of the parents and coaches in particular, they're so caught up on the idea of like, we need to get them to be better at skill because back then, and it still applies to this day, when it comes to, and especially combat
Mhm.
sports, you really have to do a lot of skill work.
Mhm.
A lot of skill work just because of the demands. Actually, that's probably the major demand in taekwondo and combat sports altogether is the skill work, because
Mhm.
skill work is very important. And the way that skill development works is you have to put in the volume.
Mhm.
If you don't have the volume of training, and especially, and like, and this, if you just don't have that volume, you're not going to be able to excel,
Mhm.
unfortunately, because there's so many different nuances to a certain technique, right? Like, let's say the roundhouse kick. The roundhouse kick, there are, one of the videos that I made was that there's a comparison between the Muay Thai roundhouse kick versus a Taekwondo, traditional
Mhm.
Taekwondo style roundhouse kick, where a Muay Thai style kick is more like a swinging of a bat
Mhm.
versus Taekwondo is more linear. It's more like
Mhm.
a whip, right? So it kind of looks like a question mark kick,
Mhm.
actually, but every single kick for Taekwondo actually follows the question mark kick principle.
Mhm.
And so that applies to their spinning hook kick, to their back kick, to their front kick, everything. And that's just the nature of, and so there's a lot of these little nuances to skill. And
Mhm.
if you don't understand that, then it's like, if you're not practicing that, you're doing yourself a disservice. So that's really the major demand. But again, they is an over focus on that while completely neglecting the overall base of building that athletic
Mhm.
foundation, building the strength needed to handle all of that skill work. And the other thing that I mentioned, there was this video a long time ago from National Geographic where they had these four different martial artists, one from a taekwondo background, capoeira,
Okay.
karate, and Muay Thai, and they all were testing how much force they could generate from their kicks, which I was kind of surprised about. The front kick that one of the karate guys did, that was still like 400 pounds of force. That's a lot. Like, even though it's not a lot, like compared to the max kick was the Taekwondo guy, he threw a 2,300 pound of force, like roundhouse kick. That's a lot of
Mhm.
force. And so we're throwing all these kicks and with that amount of force every single time. And it's not just like one single kick. It's like tens of hundreds of kicks. And so we're literally, if we wanted to translate it, basically, it's like the equivalent of lifting over like 10,000 pounds, more than
Right.
10,000 pounds every single day. And like, again, these kids are practicing every single day almost, and they're not putting in the work necessary to actually strength train and put in the work to build that base of that work capacity to handle all those forces. So
Mhm.
that's probably the biggest thing.
Part of it is, that a lot of coaches within a particular sport will act like their sport is everything, and, they want their people to specialize, and then it makes it so the kids have the pressure to do that, and they say you'll be left behind if you go do something else, without realizing that that might actually keep the person healthier to have a wider base, to not have overuse injuries, to build capacity in different ways. Mentally, it can help with burnout because, like, I do a bunch of different activities. If I just did one type of physical activity, I would get bored. If I just ran or if I just biked or if I just rode or if I just did Muay or just did jujitsu or just lifted or something like that, but the fact that I have variety means I'm excited every time I circle back to the next thing, and they actually like, there is transferability between the different things. Running might not be the very best thing for jujitsu and all that stuff, but if I have a better tank, then that might help in later rounds, for example. So I do think it's important in that instance. But then the other thing too is strength and conditioning. People sometimes look at it as good for enhancing performance, which it is. But if we're talking about the baseline, the main thing it's supposed to be for, at least initially for beginners, is being able to meet the demands of the sport itself for the sake of resiliency. So I don't like the term injury prevention per se because you can't prevent injuries. But you take someone who's super weak and super deconditioned and you put them in a combat sport, for example, or you take someone who's really strong and really fit, you put them in a combat sport and they're both beginners, you give them the same amount of volume, I would almost guarantee the person who's very strong and fit will withstand injuries better, aside from like the freak case where something snaps because pressure was applied the wrong way or something like that. But I think that's the main thing: is can you not get tired? Can you not feel like you're getting beat up or broken down? Can you not get injured as easily? And then from there, yes, you can use strength and conditioning to improve your performance. If you're already fit and conditioned and you want to be able to, say you're a boxer, punch harder, then you can train to increase your velocity, your power, your strength, and all that stuff. If it's the later rounds, you want to be able to have a bigger engine, you might hit the assault bike for sprints or something like that. But and to me, that's just on the same spectrum. It's just where is your starting point, for example.
Right.
But I wish people would look at strength and conditioning as not I do Taekwondo to be skilled, and then I just go and catch a pump. Catching a pump is cool. But you can also think, how can I exercise in the gym to help directly with the sport that I'm performing? The thing that gets kind of murky is a lot of people try to replicate the sport in the gym. That's not the point of the gym. You're just supposed to get the physiological adaptation. A squat is good for strengthening the legs, and then strong legs can help with takedowns. For example, you don't have to do a split squat from a shot with like dragging your legs or whatever. It doesn't have to be like crazy specific. A squat is great for just getting the legs bigger and stronger, and then bigger, stronger legs bleeds into performance.
Yeah. Oh, that's probably the biggest thing that irks me and bugs me to no end.
Yeah.
Every time I see the taekwondo world, there's a lot of strength and conditioning coaches, and like they have really good ideas here and there. They have like a pretty good base, but it just always irks me when, especially balance.
Mhm,
Balance and stability is probably one of the other big ones that they try to work on. But
mhm,
then what they'll do for those balance and stability exercises is they'll go into so in kicking, right? There's we call it the chamber. The
yeah,
chamber is basically when your knees are up to your chest or your stomach region, bare minimum, for that ready position for kicking.
mhm,
And so they'll be in these chambered positions holding a kettlebell
yeah,
on a posted ball. And I'm just like, stop. We gotta stop this nonsense because, one with the posted ball, like sure, I actually learned to be a little bit more forgiving of the posted ball
mhm,
because I learned about lazy feet and like some individuals where they really just don't activate their foot muscles as much, so
mhm,
their feet are just flopping all over the place. So posted ball is actually pretty great from that regard of like really getting your feet engaged.
mhm,
But to use it as a balancing tool, we already seen in literature now that when we're training on a posted ball or uneven surfaces, then we're training our bodies to be ready for uneven surfaces. But we're competing on flat ground. And so there's no carryover at all to this whole like balancing work for the sport. And it's a waste of time in that regard. And so the other component too is something that I learned a lot more with, because I think that's one of the other things that I've been really trying to experiment and learn more about is, there's also a big divide between the hypertrophy world with the strength conditioning world,
mhm,
specifically machines,
yeah,
like using machines as opposed to using like a barbell bench press. and whatnot. One thing that I did learn and actually do agree with is that when it comes to machines, because there is no stability component involved,
Yeah.
you're able to work the muscles a lot more, and you're
Mhm.
actually able to still work the stability muscles when you're just lifting a lot heavier.
Mhm.
Obviously, when it comes to stability, I think where people get confused, stability doesn't mean balance per se. Stability means, or the biggest thing that they're confusing with is coordination.
Mhm.
Coordination is the thing that helps us to balance and
Mhm.
being able to be more aware of our body, have that body awareness to
Mhm.
actually make sure that we're not falling over and whatnot. And we build our coordination ability oftentimes comes from our stability muscles being strong and other muscles just working together. And but we build that through, heavy lifting, through good proper strength training, and we could
Mhm.
do that through machine use as well. And the best part about machine use is that because, again, we don't have that stability component involved, we could really focus on another part of the literature that we're seeing is time under tension,
Mhm.
mechanical tension for the muscles, where the muscles, they get a good stimulus, especially from a hypertrophy and strength lens when we're putting them through, longer periods of that tension with the muscles. So like I think it's actually very similar to mobility and flexibility work. Like now we're going to like numbers. I think like from what I remember for like hypertrophy and strength, like your muscles being in that tension point should be to get a good stimulus. It kind of goes on anywhere between like 30 to 60 seconds per set. And that's the same number for mobility and flexibility. Like if we want to help lengthen the muscles, then we have to have that muscle stretched out anywhere between 30 to 60 seconds per set. So that was like a little interesting thing. But to kind of just circle back, like again, yeah, absolutely. Constantly mimic the sport itself in the strength and conditioning room is one
Mhm.
of those things that's like we're doing a complete disservice because we're also by adding those sport specific drills into the weight room, we're actually accelerating the injury process because the weight room is there to build, like you said, build the resilience to handle our sports. Where a lot of the injuries come from is from the sport itself.
Mhm.
Why? Because in sports, there's a lot more speed component involved
Mhm.
now. There's a lot more end range and all of these awkward positions
Mhm.
involved now. So the moment that we bring all of those components involved into the weight room now, and like we're also using weights, right?
Mhm.
And so we're in these awkward positions. So of course we're not going to be used to that, especially with extra load, right? So that's just a whole recipe for disaster from that injury prevention regard. That was the other thing that it was so interesting that you mentioned I think a lot of us strength coaches and just like coaches in general, we don't like the term injury prevention anymore. One thing that I really literally thought about this yesterday. I was just kind of like thinking about it in my head. I was like, injury prevention, at the end of the day, like injuries will always be a part of our
Mhm.
sports, no matter what we do. What shouldn't be a common thing though is pain.
Mhm.
I think instead of saying injury prevention, it should be more of pain management.
Mhm.
Because I am of the belief that like yes, injuries are part of our sport and that we can never avoid it completely. But what we can do is reduce the pains that we experience, like all the like hip pinching, like whether it's like hip impingements, like achy groin muscles and whatnot. Because
Mhm.
pain is a signal. That was something that I really took a lot of learning and experience from physical therapists. I shadowed underneath a lot of good physical therapists,
Mhm.
fortunately, and one really great sports physical therapist. And they help mention this whole idea like pain is a signal that
Mhm.
oftentimes it's not like a sign where we completely avoid things.
Mhm.
And a lot of us default to that where the moment that we experience some kind of pain, we want to avoid that specific movement. But the reality is that the pain is a signal of that our body is actually not prepared for that.
Mhm.
Probably the best example that I could give for that is let's say like heavy lifting for bench press, right? If I'm bench pressing, I wish, but if I'm bench pressing, let's say 315 pounds or 3 plates on each side, and all of a sudden I experience like kind of like a nerve pinching or like a sharp pain in my elbow.
Mhm.
that's a sign that there's a couple signs that it might come from that. One is the weight is too heavy and my body cannot handle it.
Mm.
And then the other signs are there are other muscle groups that might be lagging, that might be on the weaker end to to not be able to support that 315 pounds. So I had to work on accessory lifts to help with that. And I guess if we want to go dive into that a little bit, accessory lifts are really important. We
Super
could do that.
underrated.
Yeah, very, very important. And that's something that um, I, I was like watching or thinking about a lot more. Charles Poliquin had this whole idea around structural balance,
Oh, yeah.
where if your one rep max for a bench press is X amount, then your dumbbell external rotation has to be a certain percentage, and your
Mhm.
a front squat has to be a certain percentage of whatever it is. And Louis Simmons also had the same idea, but he didn't have exact numbers.
Mhm.
But one of the things that he mentioned about bench press is that your back has to be very strong along with
Mhm.
your triceps. And
Uh-huh.
so both of them follow the same general core principles that your body is only as strong as your weakest link.
Well, so yeah, there's a couple points I want to touch on there. One of them was proprioception. We can go back to that, and then we can also talk about accessory lifts being undervalued, and then just pain. So I'll go to proprioception super quick. One of the things too, you're talking about the Bosu ball. It can be good to feel like the different pressure points between the big toe, the heel, the pinky toe, the ball of the big toe, all those different points. Then the other thing I think people don't think about enough is some people have trouble just balancing on the ground with one foot with no additional like device or implement, even without a foam pad, without a Bosa ball, without any of these balance trainers or wobble boards. And if you want to improve proprioception, sometimes you can just do that by staying on one foot and then moving your body around in different ways, or closing your eyes, or looking at different points, turning your head side to side or up and down. You can, do different tasks so that you're actually occupied. You can have someone pass a tennis ball back and forth with you. But then the other thing too for proprioception, if you're talking body awareness, is doing different tasks, doing things that you're not used to, going into handstands, doing cartwheels, spinning around real fast, and Taekwondo, especially with your spinning kicks. I feel like that's something that a lot of people would struggle with very early on, is being able to like almost like what ballerinas do when they spin multiple times, is locking onto a target and being able to spin around and hit that target with accuracy. So sometimes you see people doing basketball training, for example, and they'll spin in two circles and they'll go make a layup or something like that. It's like you would never do that in a game. And it's like it's not about doing it in a game, it's about overloading the system. So that the coordination is being ingrained in a deeper sense, or a more automatic sense. You see people sometimes dribbling with one hand and passing a tennis ball back and forth just so they can start dribbling without thinking about it. And so that's why it's like I like the idea of strength being strength and sport being sport, but then sometimes we'll say with skill work, you can't ever do anything that doesn't replicate the sport. I think most of your training should be replicating the sport, but if you find that it's not actually stimulating anymore and you need to push the boundaries even further, it is okay to have different challenges that may not be completely identical to the sport. Going to the pain thing, I find it very interesting that you say that, just like pain and injury, and how people think that they're inextricably linked and they're not always inherently the same. Pain is a signal and it doesn't always mean damage. It certainly can, but it could also be a protective mechanism. And a story I've told a few times on the podcast and I just like to share is that my dad had back pain for many, many years from inactivity, sedentary lifestyle, all that stuff, working a desk job. And so when he started training with me, we had like a kettlebell that was like 40 pounds. And he started with that just to learn the mechanics of deadlifting before we went to a trap bar. But he said to me one day, he's like, "Ooh, I can feel the sensitivity in my back. So I'm never going to lift heavier than this 40-pound kettlebell." And I'd always say, God forbid you have to pick up a 50-pound package because your body won't be ready for it. So I said, "I'll make you a deal. As long as you're training at like 7 out of 10 intensity, we'll stay at this weight. But once it becomes 6 out of 10, it's not so hard, or 5 out of 10, we have to go up until it feels like it's 7 out of 10 or 8 out of 10 intensity. We'll never have to go max out 10 out of 10." That was just my way of getting him to buy in. And over time, maybe over a year, he built up to like a 275 trap bar deadlift and his
Wow.
back pain disappeared. But the main thing was just progressive overload, very simple concept, which is hard to teach people. And then just like don't avoid the stress that's causing you pain, develop resiliency towards that stress. And in the gym, people are kind of scared of lifting weights, especially in those areas that hurt, without realizing that, like you said, sport is fast and there's end ranges and it's chaotic and it's unpredictable. And the forces you experience are actually much greater. And people don't even think about the stimulus you get from sports. The weight room is one of the most controlled settings. You can control the reps, the tempo, the range of motion, the intensity, all these different things. And so I asked him just as like a trick question the other day, is lifting with a rounded back bad? And he said, yes. And I was like, okay, if you touch your toes with straight legs and your back is rounded, is that bad? He's like, no. And I'm like, if we put 2-pound dumbbells in your hands, is that bad? He's like, no. I was like, if we put 400 pounds in your hands, is that bad? He's like, yes. And I'm like, so the issue is not rounding the back or a load with a rounded back. It's just where you're at. And so that's what I think people should understand about whether it's rehab or training, is that everybody deserves mobility. Everybody deserves power, speed training. Everybody deserves strength. Everybody deserves hypertrophy, conditioning. but not at the same levels. So you have to find somebody's entry point and slowly nudge them towards progress. It's not just like that's why I don't like the. I'm not trying to bash all CrossFit, but some people are like, "Oh, CrossFit's the best because it crushes me every single workout." That's not inherently the best way to go about training. I think it's take where someone is, take their comfort zone, work them just a little bit outside their comfort zone, see how their body responds. If it responds well, you just keep pushing that direction over time. That's where the consistency and sustainability comes into play. But if it's just I sweat a lot, or I feel like I was going to throw up, or I feel so beat up today, that's a good workout. That can only last for so long before it becomes negligent training and you break down physically, mentally, and or emotionally. So I appreciate you saying that. And then the other thing too is in sports or in strength and conditioning for a long time, people said machines aren't functional and accessory work isn't functional. It's all got to be free weights. It's got to be compound movements. Those are great. Having said that, if you're doing a compound movement and you have a weak link, like you said, doing direct targeted accessory work is very beneficial. But then also from a resiliency perspective, I do jujitsu and Muay Thai. I find that I have to do direct neck work and grip work, but then also elbow work, like bicep curls aren't functional. When someone's got you in an arm bar, it's pretty functional. So
Yeah.
I don't like this black or white, all or nothing. This is good, this is bad sort of way of thinking because there is context that can be applied to all those situations. I did want to move in a slightly different direction. You made a post recently about cross training when it comes to Taekwondo, and I actually was messaging you saying that I went to a Taekwondo class the other day because I do Muay Thai, but I also said maybe one day I want to learn some more boxing to work on head movement and footwork and just better hands. But then also Taekwondo could be beneficial because of the variety of kicks. Muay Thai, I think there are a good arsenal of kicks, but it's mainly your roundhouse and your teep. But then Taekwondo, I went to the class and there's more kicks than I could count, and I just thought it'd be really cool to have the ability to chamber as well, to throw kicks from different angles, different speeds, different targets better, achieve high kicks a little bit better because most of my kicks are middle kicks with a couple high kicks if I get someone to like drop their head down or something like that. But um, yeah, so I just wanted to ask you your thoughts on cross training between various martial arts, but also just non-combat sports and
Yeah.
Taekwondo.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. That kind of touches on one of one of the things I actually wanted to talk about because you touched on it, like the whole idea of burnout,
Mhm,
especially with kids. So one of the things that a lot of the taekwondo instructors and masters they're of that mindset, and I think combat sports is very guilty of this in particular. A lot of the masters and coaches they'll be like, man, like we have to like steal these kids from their like baseball team or their basketball team so that they only do taekwondo for the rest of their life. And I was just like, when I thought more about that, I was kind of just like, what a silly way to look at it.
mhm,
Because one, again, for me, my personal experience, like I actually believe that a lot of my uh, athletic base from basketball in particular has helped me to kind of build a lot of that like understanding of spatial awareness. If it wasn't for basketball, I would, and of course, like I also do like little things like juggling here and there. But if it wasn't for basketball, I wouldn't understand like being able to be more bodily aware of like distance control and like understanding, oh, like even if I'm bad at like trying to, like as a short fighter, trying to like close the distance, like I still understand like I have to close the distance and
mhm,
understand that like, the distance management altogether. So there's a lot of benefits to just like having kids in particular just go to a different sport
mhm,
and try learning other aspects because they all carry over even though it's not the same thing, but there are elements of different sports that we could take and add to our game, whether it's for martial arts, combat sports, or for even non-combat sports.
mhm,
The other part of it is, there's the strength side to it.
mhm,
So I think the where I got that phrasing from, where taekwondo athletes should train like football players and vice versa.
mhm,
The original quote to that actually. So big shout out first of all to Coach Zach Evanesh. Zach Evanesh, where he's a world class strength coach, and he had an article where he was. I forgot who the coach's name was, but he mentioned to me there's this one coach that he knew who was part of the Cincinnati Bengals, and the offensive line. When it comes to football players, wide receivers and running backs, they have a wealth or a large variety of training methods to
mhm,
train their skills specifically, like outside of football, whether it's
mhm,
like through juggling or maybe through like ladder drills and whatnot, whatever it might be. But for linemen, it's a very different scenario
mhm,
because linemen, in order to really practice their skill outside of their sport, is very physical. They have to be very physical and be very reactive, and they have to like throw large amounts of force and whatnot. But this one coach was like, wait a second, why don't we just learn a little bit of boxing? A boxing is, very, it's not only technical, but it
Mhm.
also is very physical from the lens of teaching the football players how to be more precise
Uh-huh.
with their blocks, with their tackles,
Hand
with their.
placement and all that, yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And so a lot of, and I was just actually talking with, his name is Glory. Glory is a guy who just transferred to Northwestern now for college, and he was telling me that a lot of his D line work that he does now, he actually incorporates elements that he learned from karate and taekwondo, of like using that. So in taekwondo in particular, we teach like that whip. Like we had to like snap, be very loose, and then at the last second of the impact,
Mhm,
that's where we snap our body completely to have that like sudden impact of force.
mhm,
And he uses that to really surprise his opponents, the offensive linemen, to just like really be a lot more explosive and whatnot.
mhm,
So there's that like ability of like cross training from that lens. And then for at least for the non-combat sports athletes, where they could take a lot of elements from martial arts and
mhm,
apply that to their sports, of being more aware of how to use their body and be more precise. That's what the benefits of cross training comes from for when going into martial arts. Now the vice versa is more often than not the raw strength and power
mhm,
side of things for
mhm,
martial artists now, where that's the thing that they can learn from, football players, even soccer players or basketball players. If we think about it, a lot of non-combat sports really is kind of a showdown of just like who is like the big guy, who's the
mhm,
big dog kind of thing, especially football players. But and that ties into the whole resiliency aspect, where
mhm,
a lot of martial artists, especially taekwondo athletes, where it's changed. The game has changed in particular for the sport taekwondo world, where a lot of these guys are just way skinnier.
mhm,
But like if they just added on a little bit of muscle mass, a little bit of like heavy strength training, because I kid you not, even though it's actually, they might seem very skinny and weak, but they're actually really strong. Because again, right, we both know how power works. Power is, or force is, mass times acceleration.
mhm,
So they already have the speed component down to generate all that like large amounts of force. Now we add in a little bit of strength,
mhm,
a little bit more muscle mass. Their kicks are going to be a lot deadlier.
mhm,
And so they could take that away, like taekwondo athletes or wrestlers and martial artists, they could take that aspect from these, non-combat sports athletes, build some, greater strength, hypertrophy and whatnot, to use in their own training to like build that raw power,
mhm,
not be not fall into the trap of just specializing in the sport or the art, and actually building their athletic base to be well prepared and whatnot for like an injury prevention standpoint, and also
like burnout.
and burnout too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So we were talking about, like, there's a lot of different directions we can go there, but you're talking about how training different is not only good for burnout and injury prevention, but it can also improve your performance. We're talking about weak links when it comes to joints or injury or something like that, but that can also sometimes it's not improving your strengths that makes you a better athlete. Sometimes it's what is the thing that's holding me back, doing the things that you're really not good at. So if it's a sport which prioritizes speed and mobility, but not, strength, for example, or conditioning, then working on those areas can kind of raise your floor. And the same thing, the other way around. I was talking with coach Steve White on this podcast a few episodes ago about soft versus like hard training. And soft training might be like your more mobility stuff. It might be your skips. It might be the things where you have to be kind of loose and relaxed versus the grittier things like very heavy lifting or getting a huge pump. So alignment, for example, is a very like hard sport in the sense that you have to like tense up, lots of tension, pushing, muscling, and all that stuff. And then a wide receiver might be more elusive, more relaxed in their sport. Sure, there's still contact and all that stuff, but it's all relative in that sense. And, I would say that I was more the soft coaching side of things. Early on, I need to like benefit from the hard stuff, and he was more the other way around. Where he's a big, strong guy. He was a hockey guy, but he's like, I realized that like skipping was so awkward for me, so uncoordinated. How great would it be if I was big and strong, but I could also move very efficiently? So that also applies to the concept of athleticism. What's the definition of athleticism? A lot of people just think speed, power, size, that sort of stuff, strength. I think that athleticism also has to take into consideration timing and coordination and intelligence and deception. You're talking about how going from very slow to very fast can catch people off guard. But the other thing too is a really great example is there was a teammate that I had who was bodybuilder, football guy, and he did 100 meters in track. So he's very big, strong, fast, but he's also very tense and rigid, and he wasn't able to play very efficiently. And then I had a Colombian teammate who was the only person on our team to end up playing professionally, who was a decent athlete, but he looked like he was so much more athletic than everybody on the field because maybe he could read the ball, like where it was going to end up sooner and get to the ball quicker than the other person because he started the run sooner. Or, he doesn't curve his run. He makes a straight run to where the ball is going to end up. He reads it better. Or even shoulder to shoulder challenges. If you're trying to knock someone off the ball in soccer, at least in like countries like England, United States, stuff like that, they teach try to bash into them as hard as you can or do it when they're off balance or just be strong and all that stuff. And he was elusive in that sense. He was very slippery, which I never experienced before that. He would make you think he was going to go into a shoulder barge and then pull the rug out from under you right before you make contact. And you'd be on the ground, never having made contact with him just because you're like a bull with the matadors. So I think that that's something that people need to consider is if you can beat someone with pure physicality, that is athleticism because that is a solution to a problem that the sport has asked, it is posed. But if you can also do it through creativity or skill or guile, I also think that's another solution. It's not all about the physical, it's not all about the technical, and you don't have to choose just one over the other. I think some people are like, I'm a small guy, so I have to be technical and intelligent, or I'm a big guy, so I should leverage my strength and size. But what if you're a big guy that's also clever, or a small guy that improves your strength or size? Does that just make you a better athlete? It's almost like you were talking about force is mass times acceleration. You can improve mass, or you can improve acceleration. I like to just say power is like speed times strength to make it simpler for people.
Right.
If you get faster and don't increase your strength, you'll become more powerful. If you maintain your speed and you get stronger, you're more powerful. But why would you just choose one of the 2 avenues as opposed to both?
Right. Absolutely. And something I wanted to actually kind of mention when you asked the question like what does being athletic actually mean,
Mhm,
there's something that I learned. So if we look at I'm definitely going to butcher this. If we look at the actual root word of athlete, I think it's a Greek word called
mhm.
atleto. Definitely butchered it, but the root word just means one who competes.
Okay.
And so if we think about athleticism, it just boils down to competition.
Mhm,
So competition, it varies between the sport, right?
mhm,
So athleticism really is different across sport from sport to sport to sport.
mhm,
But I think the most common thing at the end of the day is that it's like you said, right? There is both a physical and mental component to it. And, if people want to go a little bit deeper, there's a spiritual side to it as well, right?
mhm,
Where it's not just like being able to process mentally what you're trying to uh let's say for soccer, the ability to mentally process where everyone is, what direction everyone's moving, and processing all of that along with the ball movement, player movement, and also the physical component of being able to not only react, but to actually, use your, bursts of speed here and there, or to be able to use your change of direction to move. But the spiritual side of things of, making sure that if someone is, taunting you, someone's trash talking you, you
mhm,
have that fortitude, that emotional fortitude to just be like, ah, we're gonna stay calm, because that's also another part of side of things of the mental arousal, that
mhm,
arousal state of like you're in that zone where you're not too relaxed, but you're also not too freaked out or like too like on edge, because you want to be in that optimal state where you're just like in that zen where everything's just flowing and you're just reacting so smoothly, but you're also, again, you're not too relaxed where you're just like, ah, like I'm at a beach and like I'm not gonna be able to react to anything. It's like that sweet spot. So yeah, that's it's definitely that was definitely like a good question of like what exactly does athleticism mean? And because again, like at the end of the day, it really boils down to like there's just so many different components. And if we do want to you know, have some kind of concrete definition to it. Athleticism is having that good base of the physical, mental, and spiritual side.
mhm,
But that's also why the more I kept thinking, this was why I ended up going to school for counseling again, which
mhm.
is, it's like I kind of wanted to like make that like trifecta almost, where
Sure.
Taekwondo is the skill component. Then the CSCS that I have is the strength and conditioning side, and
Mhm,
I guess technically mobility and flexibility side, all the physical things. And
mhm,
then there's the third part of it, the mental, where so it's like even though spiritual is not there, spiritual and mental can kind of play a role together. They
mhm,
often have overlaps, but again, it's just being able to like with counseling, being able to help individuals of like, hey, like the different traumas you might be experiencing or the different emotional volatility that you have right now, like there are ways to control that or manage that. I don't want to say control because to control your emotions is to cause yourself or put yourself into more chaos. It's impossible to control our emotions, in my honest opinion, but it's most definitely possible to regulate them. There's like that one tennis player who I really like that one interview that this I forget the name, but he was asked like, you seem like the interviewer asked this player, you seem so composed and like focused in your matches, like how do you control your emotions? And the response was like, I am actually like, it is a battlefield going on in my head. It's like there's a
Yeah.
war zone
Uh-huh.
happening in my head. And like he actually also like admits like, no, there are like plenty of moments where like he literally, just screams and shouts in frustration. But the trick is that he doesn't let that simmer for any longer than like 2 seconds or whatever it is. He just lets it happen, but then he lets it pass. And that's the whole idea of like emotional regulation. It's not about emotional control, it's about regulating. So you do have to experience those things and acknowledge that they're happening, but what are we going to do about it? How are we going to respond afterwards to actually be like, you know what? Like, what are the choices that I have in front of me to make sure that I could still succeed at the end of the day? Because at the end of the day, results like people say like, oh, like results don't matter. Like it's okay if you lose or win and whatnot. Like at least you tried your best. It's like no, results actually do matter. They really do because at the end of the day, if you don't get the results, even if and I'm going to take this out of the sports context, it doesn't. Especially applies even in like a work context. Like if
Mhm.
we're like for us as strength coaches, if we're not getting the results of getting our athletes to be faster or
Uh-huh.
more resilient and more well-rounded
Uh-huh.
for their sport, then we're going to lose our jobs. We're going to
Mhm.
lose that client because we're not giving the exact result that they need in order to succeed. And it's the
Uh-huh.
same idea of in the corporate world of, let's say that I am I don't know, a financial analyst, and my job is to find a solution to make this one product as successful as possible. And if I don't get the result of not only providing the research necessary that shows that this product can be successful, but also be able to run simulations and also like do like different tests and experiments showcasing like, hey, this product is actually possible to be successful and like very profitable, and we don't get that result, then we're not helping our company to be a successful company at the end of the day. And we're actually, draining money away from that company.
Mhm.
So results really do matter. And to get the result, there has to be that alignment of all these different components,
Mhm.
especially in the sports world. And I think that it still applies outside of sports as well. Is your physical in place? Like, do you have a healthy body so that your healthy body can can support a healthy mind?
Mhm.
And with a healthy mind, is that healthy mind also supporting your emotions and your spirit of like, I have, even if I'm not feeling motivated, I know that I need the discipline and I will be disciplined to actually move forward. So,
Yeah, I wanna go off that because you touched on a lot of things I thought were really interesting. One was arousal, and 2 was emotional regulation. You were talking about results mattering. So we live in a society where it feels like there's 2 extremes to, like, results mattering or not, and, like, I think people are framing it wrong mentally in a sense, where they think it doesn't matter, nothing matters, and then maybe they don't give their best effort, or it's like this whole kumbaya thing. I find that's the wrong way to go about it, but then on the flip side, there's some people that are so focused on the results that they lose sight of the actual process, or it applies too much stress to an individual so that they actually crumble, whatever. To me, results are just feedback. And if it goes well, then you're saying, okay, we're on the right track, we're doing the right things. And if it doesn't, it's the whole idea of wins and lessons as opposed to wins and losses. Don't beat yourself up about it. No one has a perfect record in anything in life. Failure is a part of the journey. Don't fear failure. It's actually like, it's almost like you want to fail faster in that sense to be able to achieve success, but use it as an opportunity to learn and grow and improve. So results do absolutely matter, like that you say that. But I don't think it's the end all be all, but I also don't think that it's irrelevant. I think there's a sweet spot where you can take it as feedback and use it as an opportunity to improve your process, where growth is the single most important thing, as opposed to sometimes people say that their goal is to get a six pack, for example. And it's like, cool, six pack. My main thing for them is health. Their first goal is my second goal. If I get them a six pack, but then they feel all busted and beat up and they hate their lives and all that stuff, then I'm not going to keep that client. even if I achieve the goal they wanted. But if they feel great, they feel like they can play with their kids, they have energy, they're not crabby all the time, they don't hate their workouts, they have a healthy relationship with exercise, and then they can get their six pack, then that's actually, in my opinion, true success. I think sometimes people get too set on the destination as opposed to the journey, that whole thing. As in the direction of arousal, I like that you mentioned that because my wife was on the podcast. She's in mental health counseling, and we actually talked about sports psychology a little bit and talked about the optimal like zone of arousal. How if you're, too sluggish, you're not locked in on the game and not gonna do very well. But if you're so amped up in the soccer context, you get a red card because you go studs up on someone's knee. That's not good either. And there's a sweet spot. But also people have different optimal zones within that kind of sweet spot. There's a player, Wayne Rooney. He's a soccer player. I don't know if you know him, but his thing was if the first half was bad, he'd go into halftime and his coach would just scream in his face because he knew that he would play better angry, just not totally rageful. So he tried to find that balance and he'd go out and score a crazy goal and win the game. But then somebody else, like I was a soccer coach before I was a strength coach, the kids with less confidence, you put your arm around their shoulder, you just, like, give them a little bit of motivation, encouragement, they play well. But then the kids that are, like, more confident and they're just being lazy, you can just, like, say something in front of the group, like, "What, you think you're too good to track back and make a tackle," or something like that? And that was the right fire, and so I actually you talked about the well-roundedness of the mental, the physical, the spiritual. The way that I learned it, from a coaching perspective was TTPP, tactical, technical, physical, psychological. So they needed to understand what to do, how to do it, they had to physically be capable of doing it, and then also just be in the right headspace. And so I ended up studying for fun sports psychology and philosophy. I got my CSCS because I cared about the physical side. And then I got my coaching badges and I also did skills coaching. So I tried to learn all those things. I find that to be, it's interesting that there's more people out there. And I knew just from your base of CSCS, Taekwondo black belt, and like mental health counseling that you did have a well-rounded base. But some people go niche. I think the thing that actually helps them is how they can connect the dots. Because health isn't just physical, mental, emotional. They're all linked. If you go outside and go for a walk and get some sun, get some fresh air, your mental and emotional health will be improved. It's not for no reason. If you exercise, you get endorphins. Biologically, I don't think that's an accident. So I do think that they're linked very strongly. And then the last thing I wanted to say about it was regulating emotions. I had a son about 6 weeks ago, and while my wife was pregnant, I realized I had anger issues, and all the men on both sides of my family had anger issues. And I was like, I have to break the cycle. I have to try to work on my anger. And one of the things that angered me, which is hilarious, is people would look at anger as a negative emotion. But I was like, why is this emotion bad? But feeling sorry for yourself, people put an arm around your shoulder and tell you how great you are. But being angry, then you're suddenly a bad guy, right? It's like they're both coming from a place of pain, but one is more like, it's like a dog backed into a corner. I'm going to like fight back versus the other one, which is like cowering and shaking and crying. I was like, I'm not that type. But I worked with a therapist, but I also listened to an audiobook called The Anger Trap. I don't know if you've heard it, but they were talking about how there's healthy and unhealthy ways to express anger. It's an emotion. It's fine to feel the emotion, but what you do with that emotion is what determines if you're being a good person about it or not, if you're going to come to successful kind of conclusions or resolutions. And just to sum it up, they said there's like three main unhealthy types of anger. One is aggression, the other is passive aggression, and the third is avoidance. But then they said the healthy one is called assertiveness, which means you're willing to have the conversation. You're not going to explode on somebody. You're not going to avoid it, but you're not trying to win or beat them down. It's basically just confrontation with respect and then knowing when to leave it. And that was just such a helpful thing to be able to reframe that any emotion can be healthy within the right context and they don't have to control your emotions. You can actually just work with them in a healthier way. So I'm also glad that you just transitioned naturally to mental health because I was going to do that anyway. I appreciate that you have that focus.
I think as a one thing as a coach that I was kind of thinking a lot about, and again, it kind of worked out so well for today because I was having these thoughts again yesterday and like
Mhm,
for the past week, you know, to niche down, like especially from a business context, where we're always taught like we should niche down, like find
mhm,
a niche. But then that's also a dangerous suggestion because
mhm,
then we get like too focused on this particular niche when we need to be realizing that like yes there are some individuals where like their minds are the frameworks that they have in their minds are just in that specific niche of
mhm,
like sports psychology specifically, but for the rest of us it's like we have to use it's kind of like building that athletic base, but like for
mhm,
us it's like skill sets from learning things from the CSCS world or the strength and conditioning world, from the mobility and flexibility world, the
mhm,
bodybuilding world, the psychology, mental health world, and whatnot. Understanding that everything is connected at the end of the day. And the more that we could connect the dots and use that to our advantage, the better we'll be able to be as a coach.
Mhm.
and even as an athlete, like, so being able to just combine all of that together and making sure that we're grounded from that lens of how can I always be learning continuously from different areas and, not being, what is it, pigeonholed into our own worlds, but like going out of our comfort zone. Like, so for my case, if that means to, instead of being in the taekwondo world, like branching out to, uh, let's say boxing, branching out to Muay Thai and learning from all these different areas. And then also instead of only learning from a counselor, like a mental
Mhm.
health counselor, getting some feedback from someone who has a more sports psychology background. Maybe they have a counseling psychology background or understanding things like somatic therapy. There's like so many different things. And a lot of people, the dangers of like people saying like this is the best way. It's like, no, it's like
Mhm.
this is one way. There is no
Mhm.
best way. There is a best way for an individual because it works well for them. There is no one best way. There's so many things that we could learn from and whatnot. But yeah, for me, like, especially, you know, to kind of extend into that, the biggest issues that I see a lot, especially with kids, because for me, I really, as much as I love working with adults, I also see myself working a lot more with kids in the future, like especially in that youth range. Kids nowadays, like there's actually a study that I thought was both phenomenal in the sense of like what an amazing case study that we
Mhm.
have that we could reference, but also like it was just so saddening. There's a study that was done in Sweden, I believe, where they followed 17,000 kids essentially, all the way from the ages of like from when they're like 5 years old till 18 plus. And what they saw is that there was a decrease in physical activity. It went from the average physical activity that kids were doing was anywhere between around 4.5 hours, and that decreased over time to 2 hours.
Wow.
And what happened was that there was an inverse relationship happening where as the hours decreased, the amount of mental health problems
Mhm.
increased. And I was just like, that was like a big aha moment of like, I knew there's something here with the whole concept around like why I gravitate towards strength coaching and, personal training as well as taekwondo,
Mhm.
even though I know that mental health is important because again, people see things from just one lens of it's only this, it's only that. We need more talk therapy. It's like, no, 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 no. Everything is connected. The
Mhm.
physical, the mental, and the spiritual, they're all connected. If they're not working with each other, then at all, then there's going to be an imbalance.
Mhm.
And that kind of extends to the whole idea of like, especially like work life balance we hear
Mhm.
with adults. It's not so much about work life balance, it's more about alignment,
I
making
like that.
sure that, yeah, it's like making sure that everything is aligned from like our body is being taken care of from a physical lens.
Mhm.
Our mental is being taken care of as far as being in a proper stimulated environment where we're engaged in a way that it's not burning us out, but it's really helping us to stay in that learning process
Mhm.
and, just being fed in that regard. And then also, and that ties into the emotional side of when those two are working, then we're in a more positive, emotional state where, yeah, we'll have like certain anger moments and whatnot, but we're more often than not in a joyful, kind of mindset and joyful kind of mode where we're like enjoying the process, even though there
Mhm.
are ups and downs and we get frustrations.
Uh-huh.
Frustrations are part of the game. But for the most part, we're looking at things from a good positive lens because positivity is contagious and negativity is also just as contagious. They're
Mhm.
both contagious in that regard. So just kind of like seeing like how everything ties into together, it was just really important for me. So
So along those lines, I like that you mentioned alignment because I think that's something that's not discussed enough. Is some people say the whole thing like if you like what you do, you never work a day in your life. I think I'm fortunate to say that I enjoy what I do. I get fulfillment out of it in the sense that I feel that I'm doing like to an extent honorable work. I'm helping people improve their lives and all that stuff. I find it fun. Okay, so you're talking about well-roundedness. This is actually kind of the direction I was going to go in anyway. Um, that they're all connected and that like connecting the dots is actually a skill. And you made a Bruce Lee quote like a couple times on your post and all that stuff, and that like stood out to me. I thought It's really cool to have that. I like to study philosophy. I like to study people from different time periods that were also driven and motivated and see, is it really that different if it was done in the 60s, if it was done in the 1800s or whatever, as opposed to today? Even going back so far as to like Stoicism. Yeah. So I was looking
Yeah.
at like Stoicism and all that stuff. And yeah, I find it to be fascinating. But like one of Bruce Lee's main quotes is no style as style, no way as way. And I find that that's actually its own specialty to be able
Yes.
to not be so rigid in your thinking, to not be so, "This is right and this is wrong, this is best and this is worse." And when you're saying that, one of the things I thought of is this analogy that's like, these are all just tools in a toolbox. A hammer is good for a nail and a screwdriver is good for a screw. I'm not gonna take a hammer to a screw, I'm not gonna take a screwdriver to a nail, but if all I have is the hammer, then I wanna like, bash everything, whether it's a screw or a nail, because that's the only lens that I have, that's the only tool that I have, and then I'm just gonna say with bias that, "Oh, it's great in these situations," and then try to, like, cover up when it's not beneficial. And so that's why I think mixed martial artists kind of philosophically will fall in line with this. If I'm practicing jujitsu, I see the value in wrestling and I see the value in judo. If we're in the gi and we're starting from standing and I want to take somebody down and get into a dominant position, I think judo is very effective at that. And the same thing with no gi, for example, just takedowns and positional dominance. And then same thing between grappling sports and striking sports. People talk about what's best. Is it better to be a wrestler or a boxer in the streets? They say, well, I don't want to go to the ground in the streets where people can stomp on me, so hands are better. Someone else says, oh, well, if a wrestler grabs your legs, he controls where the fight takes place and you're cooked. Why not train both? But that extends to philosophy, that extends to whatever. It's not thinking that one is inherently better or worse. It's what can you learn from various styles, ideas, and all that. And there was a quote that I heard recently that really resonated with me. It was kind of a play on the whole. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. It
Yeah.
said, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're an arrogant son of a bitch because you don't know everything. Someone in that room knows something that you don't know. So go talk to them and like be open minded. I was like, wow, that's actually like very powerful in terms of perspective. And then the other thing I was going to say too is just talking about, yeah, I remember which direction I was going to go with this. You're talking about kids, activity, decreasing, mental health, issues increasing. And it's just weird to think about that some people have less problems and they're more upset. So, for example, my grandpa, who my son is named after, um, his father died when he was a baby, his mom married a drunk abuser, and then he was kicked out of the house when he was 13 and he was homeless, and I've never heard him complain about anything in life, and anytime I was growing up, my life was more comfortable than his. Anytime something, like, didn't go well, I just thought, "Okay, well, I could have it better, I could have it worse," and that would just kinda help me kinda, like, recenter and all that. And then that was also the same thing with, like, I never really got into the whole rat race that I need to have the nicer car than this guy or, nicer house or whatever. I just thought gratitude and all that stuff. It's like, yes, you can not be complacent and work towards growth, but you can also be happy with the things that you have in that moment. It's a very difficult balance to strike. But that was definitely one of the directions I wanted to go in was just the power of perspective and like how you frame things mentally, where even just my anger was instantly improved, not cured, but improved in the sense that I was like, okay, I don't have to feel bad about anger. I just have to find better ways to deal with it or manage it.
Yeah. So yeah, that's super important. The framing of things
Mhm.
that plays a huge role as far as how you go about and how you perform. Like one of the biggest things that where I got a lot of the things I learned from for that is there's a Olympic champion in Olympic shooting. His name is Lanny Basham, and so he wrote the book with winning in mind. And so his whole idea was around just like rephrasing how you say things because words have power. When you say things in a certain way, even just by a little, like just by one single word, it changes everything, right?
Mhm.
And this actually is very cool because even though Lanny Basham wrote this book for athletes, it actually follows the like very same principles as entrepreneurship where I don't know if you've ever looked into or like watched a lot of like the entrepreneurial like help videos or whatever and whatnot. But a lot of the entrepreneurs, like one of the common things like these successful billionaires, millionaires say is that words have power, like the
Mhm.
core of it all. And one common thing that they always talk about is a vision board. And in the vision board, you could have pictures and whatnot, but you could also write down goals.
Mhm.
But the way that these entrepreneurs or successful millionaires, billionaires, the way that they instruct us to write is they explicitly instruct people to write, not write like this, where we say, I want to earn $1 million a year. I want to have this car. I
Mhm.
want that. I need to have this. Instead, they instruct the individuals to write as if you're already getting it. Like, so instead of saying, I want to have $1 million, you write, I earn $1 million a year. I own a a mansion with 5 bedrooms and 6 baths and whatnot. I drive a new 2027, I don't know,
Bugatti.
Lamborghini,
Yeah.
Bugatti, sure. And the more that you kind of write in that setting, and the more that your brain starts to kind of see different
Mhm.
opportunities also very differently too. And it's kind of like the whole there's like that experimentation or that analogy where someone would ask like, hey, like look at the surroundings, like look at all the different, like all the different buildings and whatnot, and like all the cars that are driving. And then like the person is like, all right, yeah, like wow, this is amazing. The city is amazing. And then the friend asks like, all right, how many red cars were there?
Yeah, yeah. What were
Yeah,
you paying attention to? What is your focus?
exactly. And then the moment that and then afterwards, like he couldn't like the friend just didn't know. The second time now he was like more conscientious of how many red
Mhm,
cards there are. So
mhm,
the more so words have power in the lens of framing,
mhm,
where the more that we could kind of put into our heads the certain type of phrasings. And this is where part of the whole concept around like what is it? Hypnosis really
mhm,
comes in. Like people think that hypnosis is like this all like voodoo kind of thing, but hypnosis is really just like a reframing that's
mhm,
happening. The more that we could reframe the mind and reword things in certain ways, the
mhm,
more that we'll be able to see things differently.
mhm,
And when we do it in a positive way, we're able to see better opportunities, better just like not, and also be able to think from the lens of having more gratitude of like, I do have a lot already, like and, like, like, the fact that I'm alive, I'm breathing, I am able to walk,
mhm.
and a lot of people take those things especially for granted, like, your like, health is wealth, like, that was, like, another quote where or another phrase that I learned where or another post that I saw where, you know, everyone has, like, 100,000 problems, but a sick person has only 1 problem.
Yeah,
And it just puts into context, like, wow, like when we start to see things from that lens and again, just have a reframe of everything, it really does make life so much better.
mhm,
And it's cool that combat sports and that's one of the biggest reasons why I've been so, I guess, mesmerized by martial arts is because martial arts does a good job of combining all of that and, showing that especially like when you because sparring is, even if it's fun, no one likes to get hit. No one likes to get hurt and whatnot. And when you're doing hard stuff, it just puts into context like, wow, there's so much to be grateful for. Like having the body that can handle all that, having a body that can actually not only handle that, but can like actually survive from those activities. And also just like, wow, like I can walk, I can breathe fine. Like, talking with other people is like great and everything, but yeah,
yeah, so along those lines, there's 2 things I wanna touch on. One was just, like, sparring and what it does for you mentally, and I wanna talk about this whole, like, alpha male mentality and how that gets busted if you actually do combat sports. And then the other thing I wanna talk about was, like, Austin Yoakum is a strength coach. I don't know if you follow him, but, he likes to say that you're almost like a video game character that can have, like, upgrades in all the different categories, and he's saying that, like, people need to stop thinking that I am this, I am that. You can be anything you wanna be if you just put in the time to develop in those areas, and so as a soccer player, I was always very left-footed. Most players are right-footed, I was left-footed. It's almost like being southpaw when it comes to striking. So it's advantageous, so I never really had the need to go onto my right foot until there's those few instances that I felt so limited, and people would say things like, "Oh, he's all left." And that just irked me so much that one day I said, "Oh, I'm two-footed." And I knew that I wasn't two-footed, and forever I used to look up, best drills or best techniques to get better at your right foot, and it's really just using it as much, if not more, than your other foot until eventually becomes, like it's second nature to play with both feet. So whenever I did individual training, I would, like, start and finish on my weaker side. Or if I would play in games, sometimes I'd say, like little scrimmages or pickup, sometimes I'd say I'd use my right foot as much as possible and only go to the left foot when I run out of, like, options. And that helped develop the ability to be two-footed. But the only way that I can say now that I'm two-footed, but before I had to tell myself, even when it wasn't true, just to allow myself to believe that it was possible to eventually be two-footed. It's kinda along the lines of, like, you're not earning 1,000,000 yet, but if you say, "I earn $1,000,000," and you think, "Okay, like, I can be that type of person that does earn $1,000,000," and then you can actually start to see opportunity as opposed to roadblocks.
right.
So there is the power of the mental side and framing. As far as the alpha male thing, sometimes you'll think alpha male is just, "Oh, how I carry myself and I can be whatever." Not never let someone talk to me some type of way. It's like, "That's fine." I actually think if you're, like, really competent, you can be calm and, like, not feel disrespected, not feel like you have to defend yourself. I actually find that that's true strength. The whole, "It's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener at war."
Yes.
But, like, you see the in combat sports class and all that stuff, sometimes the tough guy comes in, he gets humbled day 1. You if you just did, like, a round robin tournament, there's only 1 alpha male at the end of the day. It's the guy who wins that tournament, but then you take him and put him against the next person who wins the tournament. You go down, there's, in theory, only 1 alpha male in the entire world if you, like, use that concept. And so, like, I went to open mat on Sunday, and I lost to half of the people, and I, like, probably was at a stalemate with a quarter, and I probably beat a quarter of the people there. It's very clear to me I'm not the alpha male when I have a 230-pound brown belt choking me. I'm trying not to die, and the only reason why I'm not dead is because I tapped, and he's so gracious as to release me. Think, like, when people talk tough, they haven't been punched in the face enough and or they haven't been submitted enough, and you just put them in those situations a few times. Man, it does a lot for you, like, spiritually, like you're saying, or just as a person to try to humble you and then make you a little bit, like, kinder and, like, I my road rage is almost cured from combat sports. Not saying I don't get angry anymore, but man, you just don't know who knows what anymore, like, so you're just like, "Alright, it's not worth it. None of this is worth it. The consequences are too high for something so stupid." So there's definitely value in that. So I'm glad you said what you said 'cause it kinda sparked those thoughts. I wanna respect your time. Do you have time for a couple quick segments?
Yeah, absolutely.
What have you changed your mind on recently or in your career that you wanna share about? Is there any one thing that stands out?
What have I changed my mind? I guess the biggest thing is I always thought that there was a perfect system. Like searching for the perfect system has been like my biggest goal.
Mhm,
But the more that I keep training and the more that I keep learning, I'm realizing, and again, I can't give enough of a shout out to the to the underground strength guys down in here in Jersey, Zach Evanesh. The guys there really taught me, like reminded me. It's kind of weird. Like we already know that we're not perfect beings and we live in an imperfect world. Like, why should I be even looking for a perfect
perfect
system then?
system, yeah,
And so like the perfect system, one, it doesn't exist, but because it doesn't exist, it's always evolving. And
mhm,
that's the fun of it.
mhm,
That's the real joy and pleasure of like because like we're always working on something, there's always something to improve.
mhm.
That's what makes this life so interesting. And I think that's the biggest thing that I've been really changing more and more recently and just getting better with.
So it's interesting you say that because that similar journey, I was like, "What's the best way? What's the best this? What's the best that?" And eventually, you just learn that lots of things work. Some work better, some work worse, some are equal. Preference matters, and so I had a unconventional strength coach on the podcast, and people would say that like kettlebells and sandbags and maces are inferior to barbells or machines for hypertrophy or strength. He's like, "I agree with you, but there's some people that hate barbells, they hate machines, they'll never do anything, and as long as they use kettlebells on a regular basis and they use the same physiological principles that exist, like progressive overload and specificity and all those different things, your body will adapt. It won't know what's in its hand. It just feels tension and resistance and all that stuff. And you apply stimulus and it adapts. It's like I'm super strong and mobile and jacked and fit. And he's like, and all I ever use is kettlebells. But if you hate kettlebells, don't use it. And it was just like kind of liberating. He's actually one of the main people that helped change my mind on this. I came from a sports performance background where everything needs to be measured and you need to show improvement in jumping and sprinting and, cardio, your heart rate, for example, or your times on a bike for a mile has to improve. And it almost feels like everything needs to be justified as, look, I'm a great coach because I improved this, I improved this, I improved this. And you can still make those same gains without actually having those devices available to you. You can debate the efficacy because there's intent driven behind the competition of it, but it's still possible with the next best thing to achieve high levels of success. So that was one of the things that was liberating to me was not to know what's better for bicep growth, a hammer curl or a normal supinated curl or a barbell versus easy bars? I'm like, that doesn't actually matter all that much. And I think it almost just makes you like a little bit more relaxed and zen as a coach to just say, I like to think of myself as a Sherpa. That it's like, I'm a guide. You have this starting point, you have this end destination. We're going to go. Things change along the way. So you don't need a perfect plan because life isn't perfect and you can't stick to that plan forever. Someone can show up and they could have tweaked something. They could have slept wrong. They could have had a bad day mentally. They could have, had an empty stomach. And then your perfect plan's out the window. You have to adapt on the fly. Maybe you have to do a technique day or more of a mobility recovery day, whatever. But I just think that's important is to not sweat those details so much. Another question I was going to ask you is there any major misconception in the training space? It could either be specifically to Taekwondo or it could just be training in general, or if you even want to go to mental health, kind of route, is there any major misconception that you wish to dispel?
Misconception. I guess it this one's hard because there's a lot of misconceptions. I guess the one thing that I will just to make it easier for myself, I'll narrow it to the taekwondo world. The misconception weights.
Oh, yeah, that they're bad for you?
Yeah, that's probably the most annoying one because again, like, the one athlete that I really wanted to help, the family was like, "Well, like, she has to make sure, like, she doesn't gain too much weight because,
Mhm,
like, at her age, like or, like, she just gains weight too easily and whatnot," and I'm just like, you know that your daughter is only 13, 14 years old,
mhm,
and that is at an age where they're growing. Like,
mhm,
they need to have food and they need to, like, build strength and whatnot, and, like, also just touching like, you're not going to all of a sudden become like a
Arnold
like
Schwarzenegger if
yeah,
you touch
Arnold
5
Schwarzenegger by, like, touching 1 pound dumbbell. That's not gonna happen. So, that's probably the biggest misconception that I would love to dispel. It's like, especially in the martial arts world, it's like it's like that and also, like, soreness. Like,
mhm,
soreness doesn't come from weightlifting. A lot of it like, it might be part of it
mhm,
because, especially since we're and usually in weightlifting, we wanna look at the eccentrics. A lot of soreness comes from, the eccentric work,
mhm,
like putting our muscles and our tissues in the end ranges.
mhm,
So if anything, throwing a lot of kicks at the end ranges is also gonna make us just as
mhm,
sore, even though we might have a tolerance for it at a certain point. But, like, it's the same idea with weightlifting. We could still build a tolerance at the end ranges with certain amount of weights. It's just, again, we have to go about it strategically and, like, properly instead of just finding a random program online and then being like, "Oh, like, here's, like, some random 3 by 10, 3 by 12 bodybuilding style, like, strength and bodybuilding style programming that I'm gonna
mhm,
just use." I'm like, "Stop." No, like, there are better ways to go about it and in ways that we can manage the soreness, manage the muscle growth
mhm.
and whatnot, so
Along those lines too, a lot of, like, flexible people think that lifting weights will make them stiff and immobile, but you actually use it as a tool to help with mobility. You'll do loaded stretches so that not only are you're not only are you being pulled into that end range, like, you're getting an assistance from the added weight and gravity and stuff like that, but also you're developing more resiliency in those end ranges where people tend to get injured as well because you're actually applying more stress to it for your body to adapt. So it can help with your flexibility, but then it can also increase your strength in those ranges where you might get injured more. So it's almost like what you're afraid of is actually the thing that might help you the most in that
yeah.
sense.
I'm actually glad that you mentioned that because that would actually be the other thing that I would want to, like, clear up is you most definitely can be strong and
Mhm.
flexible.
Yeah, yeah, look at your profile and you're essentially doing the splits and deadlifting 500, that's pretty high end on both sides of strength and flexibility. You're a great example of that.
Yep, 100%.
On the flip side, is there any positive change that you're noticing in the it could be Taekwondo space, it could be strength conditioning, or it could be mental health space?
Think strength and conditioning in particular for actually, I'd say it's all 3 I'm seeing a positive change. I think that the interesting thing that we're seeing in the social media world is that there is this kind of overloading of information, too much stimulus of, like, all this information circulating and whatnot, and there are people who want more honesty and transparency, and, like, people are recognizing that too. And it's
Mhm,
not that people were not recognizing it per se, but, there was still that lack of awareness.
mhm,
And at least for me, the sense that I get from kind of like through my interactions with a lot of people at the gym and what there is this longing for, like, what actually moves the needle for
mhm,
training, for mental health, for taekwondo and whatnot. Like,
mhm,
what is not like, because again, we see a lot of videos that follow like the whole trendy ideas of like, oh, like, if you do this, then you will most definitely, if you kick this way, then you'll never have knee pain ever again. And it's just like, no, like, and people recognize that now. And I think that's one of the biggest positive trends that I've been seeing where
mhm,
it's like maybe it's not as much still, and people are still susceptible, of course, but there is a positive trend from what
mhm.
I see. Like, people are recognizing and they are wanting more like authenticity and like what actually works and whatnot.
So that kind of sparked an idea for me. One of the things I heard was, like marketing always felt kind of sleazy in networking, but if you do it, like you said, authentically, then it's not a bad thing. If you create a product or service that you believe in and you just tell people about it, that is marketing. You don't have to say, you know, say that your product is worth 500 on sale for 200 in your line because it's never worth 500. That could be sleazy, but if you just say, "Hey, like, my product's worth 200 and I believe in it, and I think it can help you," suddenly that doesn't feel so sleazy, and same thing with networking. I used to hate the idea of networking in terms of, like, you just go to conferences, you grab people's cards, you say, "Oh, cool," and you never talk to them again, or you think of it as transactional in the sense of, like, "What can you do for me? Okay, well, now I can do something for you." To me, this is networking. It's just meeting people that you get to like and agree with and share ideas with, and I actually find that this is, like, um not only enjoyable, but I don't feel bad about it in the slightest, and so I think that it's cool to have, different avenues for achieving that, but then along what you're saying people have a better filter, I guess, for BS when it comes to, like, the fluff and those traps. I also find that people are engaging more with long form content. Like we're starting to see a shift from it just kept getting shorter, 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 6-second clips or whatever. And it was just like super polished as well. And now you're seeing people can just set up a camera and talk for 20 minutes and people will watch it, even if you don't have the best transitions and sound editing and all that stuff and filters. To me, that's it's kind of nice because I got into social media posting, having never really done it as a teenager, not knowing what I was doing. And then they started to make a shift into an area that I felt more comfortable with as opposed to having to become a pseudo film editor or something like that, having to get the fancy cameras and tripods and all that, so I think that's cool. Um, the okay, 2 final questions. What feels like a touchdown in your job, whether it's Taekwondo, strength coaching, or mental health counseling? What feels like a victory? What makes you feel really good about it?
When people come to me saying that they're seeing visible improvements
Mhm,
or physical or like just tangible improvements, it doesn't even matter if it's for Taekwondo specifically. And I'll give you an example actually. The most recent one that I had, I not only help people obviously with Taekwondo and mobility and flexibility and strength and conditioning, but also especially I do have to credit Ben Patrick and his whole AT that has taught me the general framework that I use around rehab and whatnot and injury prevention. I can't say rehab because technically not a physical therapist. So got to be careful there. But an individual did come to me and he has herniated discs and he was just like, I don't want to do surgery. And, I'm like, or it seems like I might have to do surgery and whatnot. One of my friends actually ended up referring him to me to be
mhm,
like, "Hey, work with Philip, or just give it like at least one session." And so I've been working with him now for less than a month. And on Friday last week, he came up to me and was like, "Philip, like," I got scared because he was like, "Philip, let me tell you something." I was just like racing myself. I was like, "Oh my goodness, what's happening?" And he was just like, "Philip, I've never felt this good in years." And so like just to kind of put it into perspective, for him to even just bend over, it like the speed he had to put his hands on his laps
mhm,
and he had to slowly at this speed just bend over very, very slowly and gingerly. But then, and like, especially in the mornings when every time he wakes up, because he always says like every morning he wakes up and he feels like he's got hit by a truck or something. But he was like, I woke up like feeling like I could actually jump around.
mhm,
I was like, wow. So to kind of see that I'm not just making an impact from that performance lens, but like I'm really helping people with their quality of life. And especially with like that's like one aspect. And like for kids in particular, every time I always like hear from the parents, like, thank you, instructor Phil, for like helping this, like my son, my daughter is more confident because
mhm,
you help them be more confident. Like that brings more joy to me than seeing my athletes, my clients, or my students win a medal at the
mhm,
end of the day. Because medals, like they're a part of it. It's like part of the results framework that
mhm,
I see. But if the people that I'm working with, they're not becoming better people at the end of the
mhm,
day, I'm failing my job.
mhm.
Like 100%, I'm failing. And so that's
I
like the
wanna
biggest thing for me.
Yeah, I agree with both of those because when I was a soccer coach, my first boss, I was a high school coach, I was an assistant, he was the head coach. He said that, like, he wants to coach people first, players second, and he cares more about them being good dudes than good players, and that just created such a positive culture that, like, people worked harder and they were more responsible and they were better teammates on the field. So, from a, like, sporting context, people trained harder, they improved faster, they were better teammates, they played better together in games, they won more games, but also they could walk away looking back, not remembering a single game in particular, unless it was like they won states or something like that. And they can say that this man had this impact on me, and that's the most powerful thing. And that's what I really valued with when I was a soccer coach was the ability to like mentor youth and show a good example. But then when it comes to adults, many of my clients are older than me. It feels like it can't be as you know sharing wisdom with them because they're older than me, they have more life experience. But yeah, what you're talking about is like, I had a client who lost 80 pounds and he showed me his like six pack and bicep veins and all that stuff. I'm like, that's awesome. But then he told me one day that like he was playing pickleball and he overran a shot because he didn't know his body was that physically capable. And I was like, that actually to me is like, might not sound like it's a big deal, but that felt like such a huge deal that he could just like, it's not just adding years to life, which people talk about, it's adding life to the years. It means that
Yeah.
like what you're talking about is just he can have less pain. He can play with his kids more and better. He can be in a better mood. He can feel my business is called Empowered Performance. I like people feeling like they can do more, like they gain superpowers. So I think that's a really powerful thing. The last thing I was going to ask you is if you had any piece of advice to anybody about anything, doesn't have to be specific to training, mental health, taekwondo, it could be anything. What is that piece of advice?
That one's tough.
It is.
I would actually give the cliche advice I've always heard, especially like in college. And just enjoy life. I think that one of the things for me I've always struggled with is actually enjoying the process
Mhm,
and being too fixated on the end destination. And like that is a trap that a lot of people, if not everyone, always experience. And it's really those little moments in between that makes those moments. It's like we could have all, because at the end of the day, like if going down this track, like at the end of the day, we're all gonna die at some point. We're not going to bring like there's no way I'm bringing my I don't like I wish, but there's no way like I would bring like $50 million into heaven or whatever,
mhm,
whatever afterlife people believe in, right? And it just goes to show the importance of just having meaningful relationships throughout our lives and building good connections with people, and enjoying the process and actually, not looking at things from the victim mindset,
mhm,
or the victim lens. But again, because again, we live in an imperfect world. But at the end of the day, what are we going to do about it?
mhm,
Because nothing's going to change for us.
mhm,
We have to do the changing. And so if we could just change the little bit to actually enjoy life, actually enjoy the process of growing, going through the grind and experiencing the ups and downs, because they're all
mhm,
part of that. And being able to look back and be like, wow, like I went through that. And also I enjoyed all of that. That's so much more enriching for us. And being able to share those memories too. Because when we can enjoy life, where we can really share those experiences with other people and to those that we care for in the future, especially like future children. Like I know for me, like when I have kids, like I don't want to be the parent that has nothing to share to them.
mhm,
I want to be the parent that is able to not only, share the things that I enjoy as far as lifting. I would love to like I like those videos of like the kids like cheering on their dads and be like,
yeah,
"Yeah, go dad." It's like I like as much as I want that too, I want to also be able to share them like, "Hey, like, this was my past.
mhm,
This was what I went through. This was my struggle, but this was also my high points
mhm.
and like I want you to enjoy them as well." I think that's something that yeah, that's the biggest thing that I would say.
I wanted to speak to that a little bit. As a coach, some people get too hung up on, like you're saying, the end destination. Maybe they think that like if their goal is to deadlift 315 and they're at 275, that until they get 315, they don't have a strong deadlift and they don't feel good about themselves. For example, it's like, okay, we went from 275 to 280 or 285. That's a win. Like it might not be that big win that you're looking for, and that big win might feel better, but it's still a win. But then the other thing too is I say people have either physical victory days or like mental emotional victory days. If you show up on a day where you don't wanna train, I think those are actually the most important training days for the ability to develop consistency in a habit. Anyone can train when they're feeling good. It's the days where you don't feel like training, you still train, that's actually like a very profound victory in that sense. So I try to tell people that, but it's just like, hey, like if you get through it, I like to say, add when you can, subtract when you need, you know? Like you're not always gonna jump up, you're not gonna PR every session and all that stuff. If you show up on a day where you have 80%, you gave 80%, that's actually 100% effort. Right? I'm not asking 100% every single time because you might not be 100% in terms of freshness, readiness, availability, whatever. But if you have this mentality all or nothing, then it's often nothing, meaning that I can't give 100%, I give 0. That's where the days where even giving 50% is a victory, and you should feel good about that. Over a long period of time, that makes a big difference. It's almost like the save your pennies and then you can become like rich off that. It's that mentality that a small difference done consistently over a long period of time is a big difference. And then as far as the whole like enjoying the process, it's like the whole smell the roses thing. It's so easy to like get into a routine and then just be on autopilot. and to be distracted and have a million thoughts and to always be so busy. And there is value in being bored, but there is value in not having to do something all the time. There's value in just sitting outside. You know, when I take the dog for a walk, I used to like play music or podcasts. Now I don't like have anything. So I can just be with my thoughts and be in the moment and look around and observe. I find that that's been good for like mental and emotional health. But then also it's like every single day yesterday, for example, I left the house at 6 a.m. I got home at 6 p.m. And then I had maybe 3 hours where I could like have food and do a bunch of chores before I had to go to sleep. But I was like, if I can just like change my son's diaper and give him a bottle and like look him in the eye and play with my dog for 10 minutes and, hang out with my wife for 10 minutes, like that's its own victory as opposed to just being
Yeah.
on autopilot all the time. So, I really like everything you had to say. I had high expectations just based off all the posts you make that you say a lot of great stuff and you exceeded them. You did a great job. If you were to, plug yourself, I know you just opened your, is it Hajin Performance? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hajin
And then your
performs.
social? Well, yeah, please plug yourself.
Yeah, so my Instagram handle is the Philip Ha. It's only one L. I know a lot of people misspell my name. It is one L, so make sure of that. And haha, like just HA. And so the Philip Ha is my Instagram handle, and then Hajin Performance is my last name, and then Jin. So HAJIN Performance. That is my online coaching platform that I'll be using to grow. Right now, the future goal is definitely to have my own facility, but right now just building that online coaching and whatnot, and just kind of like seeing the waters of how I can help people. Maybe it's solely through taekwondo, but I know that most definitely be helping people from a mobility and flexibility lens, strength and conditioning as well. So that will be, and that is continuously in the works. And yeah, again, Matt, thank you so much
Yeah, thank you.
for this opportunity. I was like, when you said high expectations, I was like, oh my goodness, I was like on the pressure already. I was like, oh my
No,
gosh.
you did great. I really appreciate it. Well,
I
thank you for your
appreciate you.
time.
Thank you again. All right.